Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Amazing Outdoors. This podcast is being presented by Upland Outfitters, home of the Relentless Pants, man. Those things are awesome. I had them out this week, and I pretty much, since I started the partnership with Jason, have been wearing those pants out anytime over the summer here where I had to do any work at the farm or dog training. I've even had them on the boat a little bit. They are tough as nails. I have yet to see a pull 'em thread. I've been in some nasty briars. They really held up a lot better than I thought. I can't recommend them enough. Hunting season is around the corner. Make sure you use discount code AMAZING, and I believe Jason is still offering 20% off on the Relentless Pants. So pick up a pair before hunting season is upon us, and you're out in the woods with a ripped up pair of pants and sweating, unnecessarily, because Jason's pants and the Relentless Pants are top notch and breathable, light. So you're going to want them this early season. Make sure you get them now. I also have a quick announcement. We've got another kind of temporary partnership with Chippewa River Custom Rods. Tom is going to be offering 10% off with discount code AMAZING10. AMAZING10. And it's all caps. If you decide to call him for a custom rod, just make sure you tell him that you heard about custom rods on Amazing Outdoors podcast, and he will make sure that you get hooked up with a discount. All that information for both sponsors and partners are going to be in the show notes, so please support the podcast and these great companies. They are really good partners for the podcast, and I would like to see our listeners support them as well. So look them up, Uplnd Outfitters and Chippewa River Custom Rods. Enjoy today's show. Welcome to Amazing Outdoors. On this podcast, you will hear about our adventures, chasing all kinds of different game here in the heartland of America. We live and breathe outdoors. We hunt, we fish, and we absolutely love being outside. It is not just a passion, it is a way of life. Welcome back, everybody, for another episode. This is number 8. I sit down with a writer. He inspired me kind of in the podcast, but definitely within, what I want to do this fall for chasing some birds. But before I get into kind of the title and everything and about the guest today, I wanted to kind of let you know I'm posted up here in the garage, so excuse maybe some of the background noise. It's been a busy last couple days. I've been out checking some streams, looking for some trout, looking for a few turkeys. I got a late season Wisconsin tag, but I got a hunt coming up here with my uncle. So trying to get a little bit squared away for that. And I'd like to also run a couple trout fishing guide trips. So I'm out kind of checking for some later hatches that are coming up here. Things are looking really, really good. If you hunt or fish over in western Wisconsin, southern Minnesota, it is going to be a great hatch. Some of these creeks are just loaded with bugs, and kind of excited. I got some interviews here lined up with a few Trout Unlimited folks. we're going to be doing a little bit of conversations regarding some fly fishing and stream habitat restoration stuff. So that's coming up. What else do I got here in the show notes? So I guess I've been kind of teasing this sponsor. I kind of last night buttoned everything up with him. We're looking at scheduling a time for him to come on the podcast and kind of share his story and his product. I'm really excited to get a pair of these pants on. So I will have a full-on gear review for this coming up here, and hopefully a podcast with Jason here, I would say, in the next couple weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Patreon. I'm still trying to figure out what to do with this. I really want to have a way to interact with you listeners, but I really don't want to ask you guys to pay a bunch of money. And I also want to have some good garb and stuff for at least supporting the podcast. So there's some stuff that I just haven't had enough time to wrap my head around, and I'm working on it. So again, I'll launch that when I get to it. Keep an eye out. I really want to give away at least one float trip or I'm still grouse hunt up north. So keep an eye out for that. That's going to be a little bit longer than the sponsor deal. So probably a month or so before I really fully have that all rolled out. Please, please, please make sure if you're listening to the podcast, you like what you're hearing, take the extra step and download the podcast. So when I release something, it's going to automatically download when you're at home at Wi-Fi. So then when you jump in the truck, you can listen. It's there, whatever. So please, please support the podcast, at least in that way right now. And if you do like it, maybe share with a friend who does listen to podcasts. One thing that I am for surely going to do right now is a sticker giveaway. So I've got stickers. It's the podcast art. It's not kind of the final podcast art, but it is what I had. I had to have some to get this thing on all the platforms, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, it's a sticker for my guide business. You see it on Instagram and Facebook. It's kind of the logo. I've got a few of them. They're kind of first rendition, so might be a collector piece in the future. Just kidding. Regardless, I'm going to give away 10 of them. So 10 listeners, first 10 to email me. I'll package up and send you a sticker the next day. Shoot me an email with the address, P.O. box, whatever it is, where your mom's house. I don't really care. Just an address and a name. And if you want to comment and give me a little criticism or congratulations on the podcast, great. I don't need it. I just want to get you a sticker. So first 10 listeners that shoot me an email at brian@amazon.com. I'll shoot you back a sticker. You can put it on your Yeti. You can put it on your Arctic, whatever your knockoff cooler is, your piece of junk Coleman. Throw it on the camper. Throw it in the trash. I don't really care. But if you're going to throw it in the trash, give it to a kid. So today's interview, I sit down with Edgar Castillo. He's a retired law enforcement officer or I shouldn't say officer. He had a career in law enforcement, is now retired, and he enjoys writing and got into it in his retirement here. He is writing for some of the biggest names in magazines for upland bird hunting. He has written some great articles that inspired me and, say some of the things that I guess needed to be said. He wrote a great article recently about reasons why to carry a backup shotgun. Not the flashy, nice title, but for the next generation of hunters, not all this stuff is published in places, and some of this stuff is just not necessarily taught. It's just common knowledge between hunters, and as people come into the sport that don't necessarily grow up in a family that hunts, he's writing about some of those stories. So that's really neat. He's also inspired me with some of his writing to chase some sage grouse and some desert birds this fall, so we chat a little bit about that. Check him out on Instagram. He's at hunt_birds with a Z. So that's hunt_BIRDZ. Here's today's show. All right, Edgar. I have an awesome writer here who's inspired me to look at getting out of some of my comfort zone. And I wanted to share his story with you guys here at the podcast. So, Edgar Castillo, can you give us an introduction for the Amazing Outdoors podcast?
First of all, I just want to say good morning, Brian. Thank you for having me as a guest on your podcast. Hopefully, I can provide you and the listeners some valuable information, some things that I've learned throughout the years that I've been upland bird hunting, and possibly some writing advice, I guess. But a little bit about me. Recently retired. I mean, most people know that follow me or that have read anything that I've written. I'm a recently retired law enforcement officer. Work for a big agency, so I'm enjoying that aspect of it. I was born in Central America, in the country of Guatemala. Came here when I was a young boy, and my father was not a hunter when we came here to the U.S. The story pretty much is relatively simple. My dad walked over to our neighbor that we had befriended, and Tom pretty much took my dad out duck hunting, and from there on, my dad became passionate about waterfowl and then gravitated towards upland hunting, and I started tagging along when I was a little bit older, 12, 13, 14 years old, and from there it just kind of kept on growing and growing, and I think as all young men kind of do, I started to kind of pull away. Other things came into my life, girls, cars, and friends, not necessarily in that order, and so there was a short time period where I really didn't hunt with my dad. That was just not something I really wanted to do. But after college, I joined the Marine Corps, and I came back from my first deployment, and my dad wanted to go bird hunting, and I said, of course. And then that is when pretty much the bug kind of bit me again, and I've been hunting ever since.
I kind of went through some of the similar things as a young man too. It's like you grow up with family hunting, and then friends, cars, and girls get in the way. and we kind of circle back around to some of the things that are more important once we kind of mature as men or women, and as we grow up. So kind of interesting to hear that you went through some similar hunting history with your dad. Kind of friends kind of probably at late teens kind of took priority, and then you found out after the Marine Corps what was really important to you.
Yeah. I actually, it was funny because even in boot camp, and then after when I, went on to the fleet, I was always surrounded by other Marines that had hunted, and it was just kind of it was almost like a common thread between us that kind of connected some of us that that got pretty close and became pretty good friends, and it always came back to hunting. And then when I came back and back home, it was just kind of I just kind of knew that there was something missing, and I just when we went out with my dad, I remember that day. It was on a weekend. It was a cold and cloudy day, and it was just me and my dad driving the back roads of rural Kansas, looking for some bobwhite quail and roosters. And my dad he had a knack for just locating birds. He still has such an incredible eyesight, and he saw some birds scurrying across, and it just happened to go into some public land. We got out and started walking in. I shot a rooster, minutes later. I don't remember how long the hunt was, but just right after that, it just all came back into my life, and it hasn't left.
Once you're addicted, it's a really hard thing to get rid of, I've noticed. So with that, your background in law enforcement and military, and your love for hunting, you've made a shift recently into writing. And can you talk about what kind of led to that shift and what it kind of inspired you to do some writing?
Yeah, of course. It really just kind of started out by accident. And let me back up. It was, I think, well, at least for me, I was one of those guys that would, just pour over hunt magazines, from day one, whether it was Field and Stream or Outdoor Life. Um, for me, it was both of those magazines, as well as like Shooting Sportsman. The Upland Almanacs have been around for a long time. Prior to their name change, they were known as the Grouse Almanac, and I always read all the articles, and I always envisioned myself, first, man, I wish I could go to those places and hunt those birds. And then I just kind of thought to myself, man, one day I want to write, or, how cool would it be to have a story or something that I wrote, or some photographs. And, I think we all think that, at some point, maybe, I think we do. And
I sure have.
The opportunity just kind of, like I said, it just kind of happened by accident. It just almost 4 years now. I was asked to write a couple of pieces for Harvest in Nature and Project Upland. They had all happened relatively within about a month of each other, and so I wrote two pieces for Harvest in Nature. They were more along the lines of tips, information, on upland hunting. And then I did the same thing for Project Upland. AJ had reached out to me, and we spoke on the phone, and he'd asked me if I was interested in possibly, providing some regular content. And of course I said yes, and I didn't know what I was getting into, and I'm one of those guys that if I'm going to do something, I like to do the best I can, and then I like to if I'm going to do something, I want to be the best at it that I can be, and I was like that in work. I was very successful. And when I got into writing, it was the same way. The bad thing is that there was hardly anything out there for new writers. Everything that I learned was just pretty much on my own, or picking the brains of people that I did run into or reach out to, and they just happened to email me back, and it's been a blessing since then. I've really enjoyed it. I've met a ton of people and gotten a lot of opportunities from it, and now I'm writing regularly for several different magazines and online digital content.
Yeah, I've read a number of your articles. When I first kind of got into upland hunting, living here in the Midwest, it was grouse and woodcock and occasionally a pheasant. And a buddy of mine a few years ago got me hooked on bobwhite quail. So I started going down to Kansas. And at that point, I'm kind of like you. I want to do the best that I can at everything. So I tend to dive in and do a lot of research. And I just want to know everything I can about a species or an area that I'm going. And that's kind of how I ended up stumbling across some of your articles, and, like the scale quail article for Kansas and your Flatlander's Guide to Desert Birds and some of the sage grouse writing. That really kind of pumped me up for some of these other species that I really not even considered hunting. And I started digging and looking and seeing the opportunities that were there for me. And I honestly, I can point back to about 3 or 4 articles that I read of yours that really fired me up. And it, you mentioned it in some of the other stuff that we had talked about, is that, some of these articles are not very sexy, or they're a little mundane in the history aspect of some of the upland bird hunting. I like that stuff. Not everybody does, but understanding that history and how we got to the place we are today, I think is extremely important. And I think recently you had written an article on like the Huns in New York and telling those stories. So how much of your passion for writing is kind of mixed in with that history element and telling these stories that are maybe forgotten or not known to the new hunter?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, the history aspect is it's a recent thing. Maybe a maybe a year and a half. You mentioned the Huns in New York story. I came across an old Field and Stream magazine article. The magazine, I think it was 1968 or 69. It had been given to me by a fellow officer as a gift when I turned 50. Just about a year ago, just right before I retired. And reading through the magazine, I was just enamored with the magazine in itself, just because there was pretty much the magazine is still the same, but the ads are different. 35, 40 years ago, people are still reading about tips on how to hunt, certain type of birds and big game animals, just like we are today. And I had come across this article, had some not really beautiful artwork, but just, it just kind of, I was like, what is this? And it showed two guys, and, I believe the landscape was supposed to be kind of like upstate New York, 50, 60, 70 years ago. And I read the caption, and, as I read it, it just kept on pulling me in, and I was like, well, man, although I've never hunted Huns before, and there's other birds that I've never hunted, but I tend to see myself as pretty knowledgeable in the upland bird world, even though I haven't hunted certain birds. Like yourself, I like to read a lot and try to familiarize myself and educate myself with all types of upland birds. So, one day if I do, am able to hunt them, I know a little bit about, where they live and how to hunt them and the habitat and so on and so forth. But this article just kind of took me by surprise. And, I read the article, and I started doing a little bit of research, and I was like, man, I think this would be something interesting that people would like to read. There was a time and place, a long time ago that someone could go and hunt Huns in New York as opposed to driving west to what we think of North Dakota, Hun country, Montana and Oregon and Washington, and so I just wrote about it, and I think it did pretty good as far as I remember getting a lot of comments and questions about it. And I was able to speak with a couple guys that actually remembered speaking with their, if I remember right, I think their grandfather, great uncle, saying that, hey, yeah, man, this brought back a lot of memories. I remember my grandfather and my uncle talking about hunting Huns when they hunted grouse up in northern New York. And I just thought that was cool.
Yeah, it was a really neat article. I've got some other ulterior motives. I'm not, probably ever going to head out to New York and do any hunting anytime soon, but I'm doing kind of a little mini series podcast on some of Wisconsin's native birds, and they had Huns as well. So that's kind of where I gravitated towards it, to hear that story from New York and look at some of the parallels that might have happened in Wisconsin and just that history element. I actually, in kind of talking about some of that stuff and prep work for today's recording, I was reading your one of your prairie chicken articles about market hunting and the kind of the demise of settlement of the West, and kind of just the staggering numbers of prairie chickens that were taken off the landscape. And again, that history element of some of your writing for me is exposing me to history that I really probably wouldn't have read unless I had an interest in bird hunting. So having that encompassing in kind of a, Project Upland or some of these other bird hunting related magazines, I think it's attracted, at least for me, being a younger guy, hearing those stories, making sure that I learn those life lessons so I don't have to repeat some of the same mistakes, and going forward with my conservation dollars where I spend them, I want to make sure that I'm spending them in the right place. So it was really neat. Speaking of that prairie chicken article, I can't remember when did you write that article, and kind of how did you go about finding all the research for that particular article? Because it was, to me, some of those numbers were very staggering, and I'd never really heard that story before.
I'm assuming you're referring to the I'll have the prairie chicken please that I wrote for Field Ethos.
Yes. That was the article.
Well, you made a really good point that it's funny when I started doing research, just kind of get a little bit of history on it. I started to find a lot of similarities. There was 100 years ago, there were people like you and me and others that started seeing the demise in the numbers of birds, habitat, and conservation. Topics such as those had started, popping up. So it was kind of neat to see, that, there was already not really an organization that had been put together, but, different men and different groups throughout the country that started seeing the decline in birds, and that, they started a road to try to keep them around, for future generations. So you and I, could be hunting them, and for the most part, we are hunting, some of those birds. But for the prairie chicken article, I actually had run across, I can't remember what I was doing, but I ran across an old, I think it was like a early 1900s menu / advertisement for a restaurant called here in Kansas City called the Savoy, and it mentioned prairie chickens, and it mentioned some famous people coming to dine at the restaurant. So I just started researching, started Googling, and I started finding, that, back in the day, 100 years ago in the early 1900s and just before the late 1880s and 90s, that, prairie chickens were just hunted just by mass numbers. A lot of us, when we think of market hunting, I think most people kind of think about waterfowl and obviously the buffalo. Those are probably the big two that kind of come to mind. At least it did for me, prior to doing this article. But I just started finding different pieces of information. I researched Kansas archives and Iowa archives, and started finding old newspapers that had been scanned in and had public access. And from there, I just started getting all these numbers. And as I read and started doing more research, just the amount of prairie chickens that were killed, just thousands. They were just killed in just so vast numbers that they would fill, train cars and then shipped off to, the big eastern cities, Chicago, New York, for, to be consumed at, fancy restaurants.
Yeah, I think the numbers that you had in the article, I think Chicago had taken on something like 500 and some thousand birds, and New York had like 600,000, and that was in 1 year. I mean, it's over 1 million birds taken off the landscape for restaurant or, storefront consumption, versus today where, the guy, I'm talking about prairie chicken, I think a lot of people, I don't know that I've ever had one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now prairie chickens, it's a very sought after upland bird trophy. If you want to refer to it that way, it's they're only in a handful of states, and to shoot one is, it's not only a hunt in itself, an adventure, because mostly you got to walk quite a bit. But
I'll have to share with
yeah.
you my prairie chicken that I shot, because it's not very typical of a of a prairie chicken hunt. But anyways, I'll share with it when you get done with your thought.
No, I was just going to say, just yeah, in the article, it was just staggering, the numbers and the amount, and they talked about certain individuals. Yeah, I remember there was a story in Iowa where there was a lot of the farmers were just, started protecting their own land from these market hunters coming on their land to shoot, all these bird chickens. And it talked about they were so numerous that little boys would go out with sticks and just, hit them over the head and bring them back to home. And and I'm sure probably, maybe some of the numbers were inflated, but I mean, the photos that I came across and just the references after references about the number of prairie chickens, I started just thinking, I was like, man, I'm glad there's, people like myself, back 100 years ago that saw that this was not a good thing and that they needed to put a stop to this, as well as come up with some kind of legislation and protection for these birds. And eventually, years later, they started enacting um, conservation laws that stopped market hunting and that wouldn't allow the sale of wild game, whether it was fowl or just buffalo and other types of animals to be sold at restaurants. And those the laws and the conservation that started, what we know of today is, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, and Quail Forever, and, TRCP, and, all these different organizations that are working so hard, the Sage Grouse Initiative, that are working so hard now to protect, a variety of animals and birds, as well as their habitat. So, so they stick around 100 years from now.
I know, reading not only this particular article, but a couple of your other articles that, I don't mean to paint this in a negative light, but some of these historical pieces that you've written tend to kind of bring out a sad story. And I just can't imagine what it would be like today if some of these people back 100 years ago didn't recognize what was going on, that we can't sustain this, that these are really wonderful creatures that we're going to wipe from our landscape if we don't stop and consider the future. And with everything going on today with some of these, you mentioned QF and PF, their Call of the Uplands kind of campaign, it kind of inspired me to kind of look at things a little bit differently and realize that we're kind of going through another renaissance here in America for conservation when it comes to especially the native grasslands and the prairie landscapes, and kind of some of the combating that we need to do with row crop farming and just learning to live in a balance of edged cover and farm and agricultural land. I'm really excited for the future, knowing that we've had a foundation of conservation now for 100 years in America for some of this stuff. And I think that the science and the awareness are starting to really ramp up. And I think it leads us, I think, to look to the future. And I see bright futures ahead for generations to come. These birds 100 years ago were nearly wiped off the landscape. And if it wasn't for those people who stepped in and said, we got to change something, we wouldn't have these here today. So it's really nice to hear the history, hear the sad stories, and then correlate that with some of the things that we have going on today. And I think it gives a much better outlook than what things would have been if nobody stepped in.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we could very well be, sitting here talking about, man, I wish, there was still prairie chickens around. I mean, there are certain states now, that you can't hunt certain birds just because they're, the numbers have declined so much, and it all started, due to overhunting and market hunting. And then from there, the habitat and conservation issues arose. But, places like Illinois,
Wisconsin. I'm
yeah,
doing a mini series, and I actually just sat down this week with the one of the head upland field ecologists for Wisconsin, and they have it's not traditionally a what would be considered prairie chicken habitat prior to kind of the settlement of the United States. But Wisconsin went through this big cutover where, it was all woods, and they opened it up to agriculture, which gave a great mix to prairie chicken boom. And, they haven't had a recreational season since like the 50s, but they've been able to manage a small 4-county area that has these birds, and they're making an effort to link the properties, and that's one of the things too that I think a lot of people don't understand, especially with these native lekking birds like sage grouse and sharptail
right.
and prairie chicken. You disturb that lek site, it goes from CRP to row crop. That lek site's never going to come back, and the damage done potentially there is significant long-term impact. So yeah, it's kind of interesting when you start looking at like Illinois and Wisconsin and even, Minnesota here. We've got plenty of good habitat for prairie chickens. It's been plowed under. It's been turned into row crop, and without groups working with farms to advocate for these spaces, we're going to end up like, Illinois.
Yep. And, you mentioned those states, and, you throw in Ohio and even Oklahoma.
Yep.
And Texas, talk about the Atwater prairie chicken. I recently, with a group of other bird hunters, I put together a tour. We went down to the Sutton Avian Research Center down in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and we were fortunate to see, greater prairie chickens, lesser prairie chickens, as well as talk to staff and researchers about the Atwater. And, prior to going down there, I did a little bit of research, and, the Atwater prairie chicken also was fell victim to overhunting and market hunting. And they were, they live in a very specific type of environment and habitat.
Yeah, aren't they like
Texas.
a coastal bird?
Yeah, it's kind of like the heath hen.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of numbers down in Texas. They live in a certain area, and places like the Sutton Center, and they're working and collaborating with other conservation organizations and state agencies to make sure that these birds just don't become extinct. And it's important. We can go on and on, on a tangent about, I'm a really big proponent. I think everyone, all hunters and outdoorsmen, fishermen, or if you're a hunter, or, you're just a lover of the outdoors, I think you need to become a member of any type of conservation organization, whatever pulls to your heart, and try to be an active member, whether it's volunteering at an event or doing cleanup. But because I was like that for a long time. I was every year my dad and I paid our dues for pheasants and quail forever, and probably about maybe 10 years ago, I just said to myself, I'm just kind of tired of doing this. I'm going to be active. And so, I started going to the meetings, and now I'm on the board here within our Kansas City Regional with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, our chapter. And I've gotten a lot of satisfaction out of it. And a lot of that stuff is because I like to hunt on those public lands and chase after those birds that, I want to make sure that they're here as I get older, that I'm able to continue hunting them, as well as, my, generations that come after me. And I think it's really important for people to get involved.
I can't express or say anything better. All I can do is correlate I pretty much have come to the same realization in my life that without these groups, without your dollars, without your time commitment, the habitat's being lost. Are you going to be part of it? Are you going to be part of the solution? Because, I mean, you look at some of the numbers that Quail Forever and Pheasants Forever came out, and I referenced this a couple times on the podcast, but I had heard that, when Call of the Wild or Call of the Uplands came out, something along the lines of like 3% of native bobwhite habitat is left in the United States today. And, something like a couple million acres of lost grasslands over the last decade. And, that's on my watch, it's on your watch, it's on QF and PF's watch, it's on everybody's watch. But if you don't get involved, you can't, I just don't think you have a soapbox to stand on, at least that I could legitimize for any complaints about no birds or no habitat or no space to go hunt. It is very, very important to be involved. And if you're not going to be involved, I don't have any sympathy for the complaints.
Yeah, and like, I know people are busy. We all have our own lives, family, careers, and all kinds of other commitments. But I really do think, if you can't volunteer or at least join and join an organization that you're passionate about and aware of what how the money how it's spent and help in that way, in that aspect. Making sure your money's going to restore certain areas, and it's kind of cool to see that magazines and just to throw Project Upland out there. They're in their magazine. They have a large social media presence, and they're involved in doing collaborating projects with all types of organizations, the Rough Grouse Society, and getting the word out. And then you've got Field and Stream and Outdoor Life, and obviously Pheasant Forever and Quail Forever. They all have their own magazines and Rough Grouse Society, but there's just a ton of groups out there, and you're constantly reading about it and people are writing about it, and it's just kind of cool to see that these other organizations have taken up the mantle and putting the word out and trying to educate people and saying, hey, this is something that we need to be aware of, and you need to get involved.
I much agree, and we'll just leave that whole thing there. I think my listeners have heard enough of my soapbox issues about getting involved. I was probably, if you go back 5-10 years ago, I was not one of those guys. I was out just doing my thing, didn't really join much. I think I joined Rough Grouse Society a couple times, and maybe National Wild Turkey Federation and DU. And for about 5 years there, I didn't give any money. And the last 2 years, I think I joined just about every conservation group that I can, almost in a sense to make up for the lost time. But I part of this mini podcast series, I recently was exposed to the Wisconsin Sharp-tailed Grouse Society. Didn't know they existed. And in my research, reaching out to people, I looked at the situation. I looked at the people who were helping, in Wisconsin Sharp-tailed Grouse Society was one of them. And I looked at their membership costs and their budget, and I'm going, well, I can actually make an impact here. So I joined. I gave them my lifetime membership, and it's kind of funny. I'll be up at their board meeting this Thursday. So kind of interesting. There's so many little groups, and if you have a passion and you can find if you like a bird, just go support that bird. Even duck. Even if you like duck hunting, maybe you're not going to get out this season because of COVID or health or whatever it is. Go buy a federal duck stamp. That money goes right to duck habitat.
Yeah.
And those types of things, I think people, even if they're not a hunter and they like these animals, they like those landscapes, they can still support these groups. So, kind of shifting gears a little bit on you, Edgar, through your writing and hunting experience over the years, have you developed a particular bird that is just, that's you if you could go hunt that bird or be in that habitat, I mean, you'd be in heaven. Is there a specific bird that kind of does that for you?
Man, if you would have asked me the same question, like 2.5 years ago, I'd quickly answer you. I'd tell you the prairie chicken and bobwhite quail, and the scale quail. We have scale quail here in Kansas, but the last 2.5 years, about every month, my favorite bird is changing just because I keep on getting the ability to go out and hunt a variety of different birds in different places on invites, and I've met so many people through through my writing, and so it's just changing just constantly. But from 2 years ago, the first bird that I was able to kind of hunt was a sage grouse. My best friend and I and a group of buddies traveled up to Wyoming, and we went for the sage grouse opener. And I came back saying, sage grouse is my favorite. I could hunt, the hunt those giant birds, in the high desert in the sage flats. And then, a couple months after that, I had the opportunity to go to Arizona and chase desert quail. And then I also, was able to find someone through social media that invited me down to southern Missouri. Mr. Dave Mayer, a retired biologist, to hunt woodcock. And I never would have thought about, woodcock in Missouri, just next door to Kansas. And I went down there, and numbers were crazy. I mean, we had a 3-man limit on public land, and we're talking like 40 birds in a half day, moving. And so that bird quickly became my favorite. And so, man, I would tell you right now, the answer, I know that was a long answer, but I would tell you right now, the last birds that I hunted was Arizona this past January, again for the second year. I would tell you Gamble's quail down in there, down in that desert type of environment right now would be the bird of my choice to hunt and chase. It was just so cool.
Did you see big covey sizes of Gamble's this January when you were down there?
We got into some pretty good, decent size. The year before, I think we got into just larger coveys. This year they were kind of more spread out. I mean, we did get into, I'd say maybe 15 birds. I think maybe there was a covey that was maybe about 20, but most of the birds we got into were 4s and 5s here and there, but it was constant. There was no lack of birds by no means. I just should have shot a little bit better, but yeah.
I have that problem too.
Yeah, it's just such a great, Arizona. There's a lot of public land. You can hunt Gamble's and Murns and scale quail, and I just found out this past trip that you can hunt chukar and rough grouse.
Really, I didn't.
In northern Arizona, you can hunt chukar.
They have
rough
chukar.
grouse. Yep. And they also, Arizona's also is in the southernmost range of the bandtail pigeon, and Arizona also has a open, I think it's somewhat limited, season for bandtails. I wrote an article on that, so when I was doing the research, Arizona had popped up, and then I this past January, I spoke to a couple guys that had seen them, or I can't remember if they'd actually hunted them, but Arizona offers quite a bit of variety of upland birds for the traveling, wing shooter. Definitely a state to kind of look into, and it's a very doable trip. wasn't too bad as far as cost, as long as you could reach out and kind of coordinate, um, um, your travels and go with a couple buddies. It's really doable.
It's on my list of things to be doing in January this year. I'm hoping to bump my January Kansas trip up to December, and then after Christmas, New Year's time frame, I'm hoping I got a camper behind my truck, and I'm headed down to Arizona for an extended trip.
Well, yeah, if you do, let me know. I said I'll tell you right now. There's a bunch of whether you're going to go the guide route or you just want to go down there to hunt with new friends. Because the guy that my best friend Hutch and I that we met, Spencer. We were heading down to Arizona. I put out a thing on Instagram on story just to say, hey, we're heading down to Arizona. We're going to be down there during such and such dates. And we were just kind of looking for some, local tips on how to hunt birds and what kind of, we've done our research on, where to look for them and stuff like that. But, when we landed, we had a bunch of invites and we ended up having dinner, a Thursday evening and met up with, my buddy Spencer. We had been talking, back and forth on Instagram and we saw that we were in Arizona. We met for dinner and, plans were made, and for the next 3 days, after that, he was showing us around all over the state, and we got into all kinds of birds, and it really was just like hunting with someone that I'd known for years, and that was 2 years, just 2 years ago, and went down there this year, and it's, Spencer and I talk, when we can't quite often, texting or, every once in a while catch up on a phone call, but yeah, there were just so many guys that we met down there, and they were just open to our visit and kind of showed us around, and it's a great trip.
It sure seems to be, and I've got a couple connections I've been trying to exercise a little bit, and we'll see how it comes together. I'm first time this fall be taking on a few rough grouse hunters and woodcock hunters up north in northern Minnesota. So depending on how my fall books out, we'll see. I'm hoping, like I said, extended trip, maybe stop in Kansas on the way. I honestly, your desert or your scaled quail article really, I want to stop at the Cimarron National Grasslands, and I almost made it there last trip down there, but the wind was just howling, and I was still, I had some work I needed to do on the computer, so we kind of took the day that I was planning on hunting down there and made it a rest day for the dogs and a computer day for me with the bad weather. But yeah, it's there's so much between here and Arizona. We'll see how long it takes me to get there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've spoken before. Like I said, when you make it down here to Kansas, let me know, and we'll try to meet up and we'll share a field together. But talking about Cimarron, I get probably the most of my questions and inquiries I get from people is scale quail and Cimarron and prairie chickens. And Cimarron, it's tough hunting. We hunted it the last few days of the season this year, and I've gone down there several times. I've been hunting Cimarron for almost 15 years. I've shot blue quail down there, so it is possible, but they're a tough bird. We found good habitat. You just can't get them up. The little buggers run, and they just don't. They're just not very. They just don't play by the rules,
That's what I've heard.
They were the same way in Arizona, but if you're in the Midwest or you're traveling through Cimarron grasslands, you're talking over 108,000 acres. It's the closest to the west, feeling to the west that you can get without actually going to, Colorado or Wyoming or Montana. You get that big open feel, down there, and it's just, you can hunt bobs in the river corridor, you got blues, and then, there's pheasants, scattered about sporadically. So you'll have a chance for definitely a chance for a mixed bag. If you can get into all three of them, it's a great place to visit.
Yeah, reading some of your articles and some of the other people that I've talked to about it, it's one of those trips where you go down there, and that's your goal, is to try to hunt blues. But at the end of the day, if you see a blue quail, it's a good day. I mean, it's a difficult hunt, and not only do the birds not play fair, there just isn't huge numbers like you see in some of the other states.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a challenging hunt, but it's one of those things. I love the challenge. I got to go give it a shot. And so that's just me.
Yeah, and it's because of that. How I've learned. I think there's just a lot of opportunities within our own state or close by, or just traveling to other states. We just talked about it just a few minutes ago that I didn't know that there was chuckers and rough grouse in northern Arizona, but it's stuff like that. When you talk to people and read articles or whatever, and that's how I discovered very, very good numbers of woodcock just next door to me, in Missouri. And, I don't have to travel to the northern states to hunt such a bird. I definitely will one day because I want to experience, the North Woods, style of hunting, for ruffs and woodcock. But, because of doing research and reaching out to talk and talking to people and reading, I've discovered, man, there's a lot more opportunities that, in my backyard or close to it that, that makes, traveling a little bit easier on the wallet. And, just, there's all types of adventures that are out there. People just do a little bit of research.
Well, or read your articles, because I'll be honest, you've inspired me to take on a few adventures. So, and I can't stress enough, I really enjoy the history aspect of your writing. So,
I do appreciate it. I do.
So, we're starting to hit the 45-minute mark here, and I try to keep these things to an hour or so. Maybe we can go over a little bit if we're still chatting here, but
yeah.
You wrote an interesting article about sage grouse and Teddy Roosevelt, and I found it very interesting. Some of the commentary, of seeing hundreds of birds flying off of a plateau bluff, or the name's really not coming to the forefront of my mind right now. But anyways, with that particular article, there was some conversation in the article about the sage grouse not getting some of the attention that I think you thought that they would, with the love of kind of Teddy Roosevelt. How did you find a lot of that information for that article? Was it little bits and pieces that you had to put together, or did you read a big book, or find one particular source that gave you a lot of information?
It was actually a bunch of little tidbits of, paragraphs and articles that I had run into, that I had found. A lot of it stemmed from Lewis and Clark. During their expedition, their journey, they had some journal entries that talked about, the discovery of the sage grouse, their description, and that led me to, Wyoming Historical Archives, and one of the main references that kept on popping up when I discovered the connection, the correlation between Teddy Roosevelt and sage grouse hunting was a painting that I'd seen before, but it just, it didn't really jump out at me. But it's I think it was done 100 years ago, but it shows Teddy Roosevelt with shotgun hunting. The description says Wyoming, and then behind them is a friend or a colleague, or maybe I think it was a Native American, and that person is carrying a sage grouse. And so that led me, I was like, well, maybe I could, Google something on Teddy Roosevelt, and then it just kind of led me down to the rabbit hole. And the book that I came across was hunting trips of a ranchman, written by Teddy Roosevelt, and it talks about his hunting adventures and epic journeys, chasing a wide range of animals, and you can purchase the book on Amazon that talks this kind of. It's a big book, but you can find that the title, "The Hunting Trips of a Ranchman," where it just kind of focuses on a certain part of his life, and there's a good section on there about him hunting Wyoming via horseback, and how he talks about how he would run into sharp-tails grouse and sage grouse. And so I got a lot of the information from reading that book, and like I said, from Lewis and Clark journals, and reading old archives, for the numbers and the statistics. And then, I found that letter that was written to Teddy Roosevelt saying, hey, sage grouse needs your help. And, Teddy, even though he was a successful hunter, he knew the importance of protection of wildlife and conservation.
Yeah, it was an interesting article. I've not personally read a lot about Teddy Roosevelt. I've heard a lot. I understand some of the facts that, the hunting aspect and conservation aspect, but I've never really read into the granular detail. So it was kind of interesting to read that article. It again, another motivator to kind of go out and pursue some of those sage grouse in Wyoming and Montana. Did you hunt sage grouse prior to writing that article, or did the article lead you to go hunt sage grouse?
No, I had hunted sage grouse the year before.
Okay.
And I had written an article for the Wyoming Wildlife Federation, which is a local conservation organization there in Wyoming. And I had written about my first trip to Wyoming, and like I said, the things that I tend to write about, I come across, and a lot of it is personal aspect, personal stories. When I was hunting in sage, there in Wyoming in the sage, I just as I'm walking along, I was just thinking about, man, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm hunting this bird that I've dreamed about, and I've always envisioned, that one day I was going to do it, and here I am walking along, this old landscape where there were reports of just hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of birds that were so vast that it was very similar to the buffalo, and that led me to doing research and writing about Teddy Roosevelt and the sage grouse, and how he got involved for the protection of the bird, and him and Hornaday were talking, like I said, 100 years ago about, hey, if we don't do something now, there's not going to be a whole lot of these birds left for the future. And like I said, we're that's at the forefront right now in the Upland News. Almost every, if you Google sage grouse, you're going to come across all types of articles, for their protection or continued habitat restoration or protection, because that's probably one of the other birds that's lost so much historical
Yeah, especially from the native standpoint. I mean, prairie chickens and sage grouse are kind of like the two birds that, well, and bobwhite.
Yeah, I mean, their distribution is just, it's dwindled so much, from back then. And, it's going to happen, obviously, with, as history goes by and, things are growing, uh, societies and cities and everything's going to grow. But, uh, guys like Hornaday and Roosevelt and other people, were thinking about, hey, we need to do something now. We need to set aside this land or we gotta stop the overhunting and come up with, laws to protect this bird.
And I'm so thankful for what they have done, because if they had not stepped in, I probably wouldn't have a chance to go hunt these birds this fall. And they're here still. They're still recreating populations. And as we grow, as our communities grow and expand, and people and cities expand, and development happens, and bigger farms get bigger, without awareness, without writings, like yours, creating a spark inside of somebody else to take some kind of action, the story's not going to be told. We're not going to understand the history. And all this noise being created today about why we need to do this, it doesn't come around full circle for people until I think they really understand that history aspect of things. And you start looking at the trajectory of where we're headed. And if you have some forethought and can look into, create a small little crystal ball for yourself to kind of see into the future, the numbers are staggering, and the action needs to happen now. We need to get involved and secure these types of things. And I just kind of thank you for shedding some light in a different fashion on some of these birds, because A, you inspired me to get out and try to hunt some of these, and B, the awareness aspect of the history and the legacy that these birds have in America, I think is so important.
Well, I appreciate it. Not that I do. I'm just thankful that you enjoyed my articles. I don't consider it's weird for me to hear. I really don't consider myself a writer, even though I've been writing for 4 years now. But it's just, comparably to others, I just write what I know. A lot of my stuff that I write is stuff that was passed down to me from my father, and the article we just discussed about Teddy Roosevelt and the sage grouse, that stemmed from a trip that I took in Wyoming, and something that piqued my interest. And so a lot of these all have personal connections with me, and that's why the things that I write about, and I'm not, some of the tips and how to that I write about, I'm not an expert. I'm not even a very good bird hunter. I'm a lucky bird hunter. If you talk to some of the guys that I hunt with, but
hey man, my uncle always used to tell me I'd rather be lucky than good.
Yeah, all I want to do is share a little bit of information, a little bit of personal history of mine and stories. And if it helps someone, if it inspires someone to either hunt or write, then that's my ultimate goal. And that's what, I hope I'm able to do that to people that, that read some of my material. So.
Well, you've done it with one guy. So mission accomplished, I guess. Hey,
thank you.
Just to kind of, round things out a little bit, you had mentioned that the prairie chicken is kind of a hard bird to hunt. I got to tell you a quick story about the one and only prairie chicken I've ever shot. We were in southeast Kansas hunting a buddy of mine's farm, and we had wrapped up. We hunted all the remaining acres. He had kind of, a half section over here and quarter section over here, and then he had kind of his farm homestead, which had a couple hundred acres on it. And behind the house, there was a road that goes back to another big section of private land, and kind of dead ends on this other person's land. And so we kind of were just taking a look around after shooting a few bob whites and a pheasant for the day. And we had seen some chickens earlier in the day, kind of in this back part of this farm. And, the typical chickens, we come up over the crest of the hill, and about 150 yards out, they get up and fly way far away from us. kind of as at least my experience hunting prairie chickens is if I can get close enough to get a shot, it's kind of like mission accomplished, because they typically don't hold like that, for me at least.
Yeah, but, no, they don't.
So anyways, it's like, maybe an hour left in the day to hunt. We kind of get to the end of my buddy's farm road and turn around and come back. And I'm just kind of enamored with the sights and not really looking at the granular detail. And my hunting partner goes, "Hey, chicken, get your shotgun." And I right in the ditch in front of the truck, here's this prairie chicken sitting there. And that prairie chicken got up out of the ditch, flew about 20 yards and out into a cut and turned over bean field. It's just standing there. And Edgar, I swear, like, it felt like 5 minutes went by between putting that truck in park and my buddy fiddling around for shells and me trying to find a shotgun in the back seat while one of us is holding two dogs. And like, finally I got my gun, stepped away from the truck. I got about, a couple feet off the road, and the damn thing flushed. And he just gave me a one shot. It was a perfect shot. And I got it on the wing, not over a pointing dog, but it was just such a beautiful bird. I actually really wanted to eat it because I've never had it before. But my buddy was adamant that I get this thing mounted, and it's sitting right here next to me on my desk, and it's just such a gorgeous bird. But yeah, not your typical prairie chicken kind of hunt.
That sounds like pretty darn easy compared to, I'm sure, like you said, you've read about it, but yeah, typically I'm walking, and other hunters that are going after chickens are walking large, expansive, distances to get after a bird, and there you are, just, right there in the ditch.
It was almost like grouse hunting up north. We see a lot of the grouse, rough grouse up north. They come out to gravel, and they don't fly real far off the road if you end up moving them. Sometimes they even fly up in a tree on the edge of the road. They're not, they grouse really like to use their camouflage as kind of their main weapon of hiding and escape from predators. And it was so weird. It just didn't feel like a prairie chicken. And it was kind of like a cloudy day, and it was like the minute that bird hit the ground after I shot, all of a sudden the clouds opened up, a ray of sunshine came down. It was almost like heavenly. It was like, here's your opportunity. And you capitalized on it. It's been the only prairie chicken that I've had the opportunity to even raise a gun on. So it's one of the things that this next season when we go down to Kansas, I want to spend a little bit more time just pursuing the prairie chicken. It's just not something we typically do. We go down to hunt quail, and pheasants and prairie chickens are just kind of an afterthought. So,
well, I hope, like I said, if we can meet up, hopefully we can get in some chickens. Is it a male or female that you shot?
I believe it was a male bird.
Okay.
It was kind of that. I'm trying to think when it was January, so it didn't have any of the really bright colorings that they get in the springtime, but he had full plume, really nice pin feathers, and he was a mature bird, and that's
awesome.
Yeah, it was a great bird for mounting. It was not I don't have many birds mounted. I got a few deer. I got a lot of fish. Birds are one of the things that my wife says I need to get a few more bird mounts. She really wants a nice pheasant mount. So I've got a goal for the fall, at least.
Well, at least you got your wife's approval, so there you go.
That's half the battle for most people. Yeah. So what do you have going on this fall? Do you have any big hunts planned that you want to share with anybody? Any unique stuff? Or
I will. I'm pretty sure. I don't want to speak on behalf of. So I hunt with about 4 guys. I believe we're going back to Wyoming for sage grouse. I think that's going to be an annual trip. Um, I'll definitely do woodcock again in Missouri with Mr. Dave Mayers. We are discussing a possible grouse or quail slam trip. So hunt all the quails or hunt all the grouse.
That
We
sounds
haven't
awesome.
decided. Yeah, we haven't decided that. We're just trying to figure out, where we could hunt the most birds at the, um, within a time period and not having to travel large distances to go after all the rest of them. If we can keep it all relatively close, or it wouldn't expand a bunch of trips to do it. But we're looking into doing either one of those two, and I'll continue to hunt all over Kansas, and I'll be back down in Arizona. I think this time I tend to go in February, but I think Spencer said I need to get down there in January so I can shoot some of the doves that are everywhere every time I go down there. But that's really about it. And maybe Nebraska. I want to go to Iowa to hunt some huns in Iowa because I know there's some huns there. I'll talk to some guys.
Really?
Recently. Yep. There's some huns, small numbers, small pockets scattered about west and north in Iowa.
Sure.
But that's another one that I just finished an article writing on Iowa huns, but that's all through research and just trying to come across something unique and something different. But I plan to do that, so we'll see what happens.
That sounds really interesting. You'll have to stay in touch on the success of some of those hunts. I as well as maybe meeting up in Kansas. Maybe out in early September out in Wyoming too. I'm teeter-tottering between Wyoming and Montana, depending on a few different factors. But right now, I'm trying to kick my bird season off with sage grouse and sharp-tail, and then I drew a Wisconsin black bear tag this fall. So I kind of have to put a pause for a couple days on bird hunting and do that. But so be it. Such a bad commitment to have an extra tag for something. So just in kind of closing here, if people wanted to reach out or follow your work, what's the best medium for them to kind of find your work, tag along and listen to and read some of your writing?
I would say the best way is social media, and that would be Instagram. They could do a search. It would be under hunt _birds, BIRBZ, and they can kind of follow along on what I'm doing. And then if they Google my name, Edgar Castillo, and then type in upland bird hunting, they'll get a multitude of articles and stories that I've written, whether it's from Project Upland or for Wyoming Wildlife Federation and other magazines and digital media.
Well, I will definitely include your Instagram handle in the show notes, and I'll probably pull down your Project Upland portfolio, a link as well. And we'll chat here offline too and see if there's any other links appropriate to include in the show notes. But I really can't thank you enough today for coming on the podcast. I feel tickled pink that we've gotten to chat and at least get to know each other a little bit. And there's definitely some common interests. And I hope we can get together one of these days to share a field down in Kansas or somewhere.
Well, thank you again for having me as a guest. And like I said, I hope your listeners enjoy the episode. And I hope they, get a little bit of information or a little bit of inspiration out of what we talked about. And if anyone who's listening, if they want to reach out to me, if they have any questions or anything, you can ask pretty much anyone who has. I will try to help you out as much as I can. And I respond to everyone that, whether they DM me via Instagram or they shoot me an email. I respond every single time and try to answer their questions.
I can definitely attest for that. I think I had pinged you on Instagram, and within a couple hours you were getting back to me, and that's how this all started. So you're extremely responsive, and I thank you personally for that too. So
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, Edgar, let's stay in touch here as the fall progresses, and if there's anything I can do to help you out with any particular articles coming up and have you back on the podcast, we'd love to do that. So I can't thank you enough again today for coming on, and I don't really have anything else for you unless there's anything you want to say in closing.
No, thank you again for having me on air. And like I said, if there's anything that I could do to help you out, or whether it's hunting or whether it's anything to do with the podcast, like I said, let me know. And we've talked already once or twice before, and sounds like we're going to be keeping in touch from now on. And for me, meeting new people and establishing new friendships, that's. That's a big part of why I like this, and so I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, and I can't. I guess my personal thoughts with that too is, since I started the podcast, I just can't believe how open arms the upland community is compared to some of the other communities I've been involved with over the years. So, I kind of just encourage listeners to reach out, because a lot of these people that we're either chatting with, like yourself, or people that are in the industry, and specifically the upland game side of things, they're just open arms. Everybody wants to kind of help each other. This is for the most part, public land sport, and people understand that, it's okay to share a little bit of information to help others be successful. And I don't necessarily see that in some of the same circles in like deer hunting and fishing. So that to me, it's just been awesome as I kind of trudge down this path and to meet people like yourself. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome, Edgar. Well, I think we can wrap things up for today, and I'll be in touch here as I get this through editing and get you kind of make sure we're sharing the right information. People can or get in touch with you. So that's all I got. Thanks a lot, man.
No problem. Yeah, I had a great time. I hope you got what you were looking for. And like I said, let's keep in touch. And if there's anything else that you need, just